really wasn't that far a trip. I just came over from West, about 10 minutes. But anyway, thanks for giving me an opportunity to address your group here today. Let me just give you a little bit of background about who I am and why I'm running. Now, I was actually born here in Connecticut. I lived here until I was about 5. My parents were divorced, and I pretty much moved around a bit. I was down with my mother. I was down in Florida. I was in New York, and she moved us out to California when I was in high school. And while I was out there, I went to college. I went to UC Berkeley. I was one of the few people up there with a poster of Ronald Reagan in his dorm room. It didn't make me too popular on the campus, but anyway. I graduated and got into the financial services business. I worked for one of the mainstream brokerage firms that has recently gone bankrupt and did not get a bailout. The single one that didn't. But anyway, I was gone long before they made those bad investments. But I was there long enough to understand that I didn't like the way the brokerage industry worked from the client perspective. I was a retail broker, and I thought the client was getting a bad shape. And so I decided to go out on my own, and I started working by myself. I was cold calling out of my one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles. And I really got started kind of in the late 1990s when I was very vocal criticizing the stock market bubble, the internet mania, and I was cold calling people, trying to get them to sell their tech stocks, particularly their internet stocks, before the bottom fell out of the market. And I was trying to get people to think about traditional companies. I was investing abroad. I was buying basic materials, oil, mining, just basic stuff that paid dividends. I didn't like the technology and the internet sector. And when that bubble burst, it really provided a boost to me, because I had spent a couple of years cold calling, and I had a long list of people, those who listened to me and those who didn't and wished they had, who became my clients. And I started to expand. Towards the end of 2004, I moved back to Connecticut. I actually started in New Canaan. I now have 2 offices on the West Coast. I have one in LA and one in Newport Beach. I have one in Manhattan. I have one in Scottsdale, Arizona, and one in Palm Beach, Florida. I have about 100 employees now. We do retail investing, asset management, investment banking. And I kind of made a name for myself, not only here in the States, but around the world, predicting the economic crisis of 2008. I became very alarmed at what I was seeing in Washington out of the Federal Reserve and out of Congress, that I started appearing on the financial shows. I started going on CNBC 2005. I was on a couple times a week. I was on Fox. I was on CNN. I was on Bloomberg. I did a number of shows. They started calling me Dr. Doom, and I was talking about this housing bubble that was going to burst, and the potential collapse of our banking system, and the bankruptcy of Fannie and Freddie, and the greatest recession since the Great Depression that I saw coming. I talked about double-digit unemployment. And people kind of looked at me like I was from Mars. They laughed at me, they snickered, they called me names. I actually wrote a book which came out in 2007 called Crash Proof, how to profit from the coming economic collapse. And people had no clue what was going on. And 2008 came around, and many of the predictions that I made have come true. Unfortunately, there's a few that have not come true yet, and that probably will come true, particularly if I don't get elected to the United States Senate. But my understanding of economics is what shaped my investment strategy over the years. It caused me to invest abroad. It caused me to buy commodities and gold and other things to protect the wealth of my clients from the destructive policies coming out of Washington, both from Congress and from the Federal Reserve. But at this point in my life, rather than just trying to figure out how to profit from all the foolish things that they're doing in Washington, I think it would be better if I can actually go there and put a stop to it. And if we can reverse those policies, if we can make the United States a place where I want to invest, where capital is going to come instead of chasing it out of the country, then maybe we can reverse this trend. Right now you've got President Obama. He's got all his advisors that he's bringing to Washington to try to create jobs, try to figure out how we can get jobs going. Well, the biggest problem is that they're destroying all the jobs. Washington is the reason that unemployment is 10%. It's actually 17.5% if you count all the people who are discouraged and the people who are working part-time who want to work full-time. But jobs don't come from government. And anybody who's running for office, particularly Republicans, who are promising to go to Congress and create jobs, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know where jobs come from. Jobs come from the private sector. Jobs come from small businessmen like myself. But jobs come from two things. They come from profits and they come from capital. If there aren't any profits to be made, then nobody's going to hire anybody. And if you want to hire somebody, you need capital. You have to give your employees tools. So without capital and without profits, there's no jobs. And unfortunately, everything that Washington is doing is destroying capital. They're taxing it away. They're regulating it away. They've made our economy uncompetitive. And as a result, we're never going to grow. All we can do is go from one crisis to another. The politicians who are in Washington right now are making the same mistakes that they made in 2001 and 2002. All they care about is the next election. They don't want to solve our problems. They just want to prevent the crisis from happening on their watch. And so we have this system of artificially stimulating the economy. Instead of letting the economy function, instead of letting it rebalance so that we can have a sustainable recovery, they want to gimmick it up with stimulus. And what our politicians don't understand is the stimulus is the problem. When you hear Barack Obama bragging about how we're stimulating the economy, all they're doing is pouring gasoline on a fire. It's the equivalent of giving alcohol to a drunk and hoping that you're going to sober him up. It's not going to work. The only way we're going to get out of this mess that politicians have placed us in is if we produce more and save more. But we can't do that. We can't invest, produce, and save if the politicians are trying to encourage us to spend. Look at all the debt that we've accumulated in the past year. Trillions and trillions of additional dollars of debt. How are we better off? We're in a deeper hole than we were before. And all we've done is lay the foundation for a greater economic crisis that's coming. It's coming in the next few years. And I'm as sure about that as I was about the predictions I made about the crisis that we think we've just solved. All we've done is we've created trillions of dollars. And in our attempts to make sure that investors don't lose money, that people who have made foolish loans can still get paid back, that people have money on deposit at various institutions that are really insolvent, to make sure that nobody loses any money, we've guaranteed that everybody loses money, because what happens is we don't lose our money, but our money loses our purchasing power. And if we don't change course soon, we are staring at a currency crisis where the value of the dollar is going to plunge. And when it does, it's going to impact every single American, not just people who have savings or have investments in dollars, but every working class American who collects a paycheck in dollars. Because the cost of living is going to go through the roof. The price of everything we need to buy, food, energy, clothing, whatever it is, it's going to get much more expensive. And ultimately, interest rates are going to go through the roof. They're just not going to go, to the moon. They're going to Pluto. Because the people around the world, the Chinese and the Japanese and the Saudis and everybody else who've been buying our debt, they're not going to do it anymore. Because they know that we can't pay the money back. And at that point, we're going to be in a real difficult situation. Because the only buyer for our debt is going to be Ben Bernanke and a printing press. And if we take that route, if we take one more round of government stimulus to solve this problem, we're going to destroy our currency. And that's an economic crisis that none of us want to live through. So, in short, I want to go to Washington to put a stop to these reckless policies, to get government to understand that they're not the solution to our problems, they're the source of our problems. That capitalism is a very dynamic system that works. It created the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and if we're going to get out of this mess, we have to embrace those principles, not run away from them. And we have to understand that the crisis that we've experienced was not a result of capitalism.